Welcome to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family. And in this series, we look at big issues affecting young people today, their education and their future, and how we can break down barriers so all young people have the opportunity to make the most of their education and build a great and bright and positive future. Now, today, I'm joined by a rock star in the world of education, maths teacher extraordinaire and YouTube sensation Eddie Wu, or Mr. WooTube. Eddie is an Australian local hero. He's won a Global Teacher Prize, a university professor, and in the middle of that, he's a practicing teacher at Cherrybrook Technology High School. And in this conversation, we'll talk about what was the catalyst for his love of learning and of education, why maths is such an important skill, and how we can better focus on supporting all young people so they can make the most of their education and address some of those equity challenges that exist in our schools and in our education system. So this is a conversation that I've been very much looking forward to. And welcome, Eddie, and thanks for joining us. I want to start with a bit of a reflective question. On my way here today, I passed my primary school. So I'm in a bit of a reflective mode. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about a kind of a formative early learning experience that was really memorable for you and how that's linked to where you are today.
I'm glad that this has been a little trip down memory lane for you, Doug. When I think about, this is a really hard question for me to answer because I have such an abundance of choices, but I think I have to go back to Year 7, James River Agricultural High School. I was quite apprehensive as a Year 6 kid going into a school where 2/3, 3/4 of the school was a farm. My mum had a green thumb, but I have discovered, in the ensuing decades, I definitely don't. And I knew that as a 12-year-old kid, and I thought, agriculture, this is not really going to be my cup of tea, but I'll grit my teeth and I'll bear it. And I got to meet, my agriculture teacher's name was Lyle Brown. Mm-hmm. And he changed my life. He's a large part of why I'm a teacher today. Right. And the particular learning experience that really has stayed with me was actually, it wasn't even a lesson. It was before he was teaching us anything, but we were just walking down to the farm. It's a fair walk from the classroom down to the plots. And as we were walking there, I remember he turned to me and he said, "How are you, Edward?" And I remember being quite weirded out because as a primary school student, I was quite, intimidated by these big, teachers, these adults who, were the authority person in the classroom. And I don't think I'd ever felt being treated as a fellow human being, someone to whom he was just interested in who I was as a person. And it was nothing to do with the teaching and learning. It was just him showing care from one individual to another. And that struck me. I thought about that moment for days and weeks and months. And clearly now, years afterwards, it gave me a little window into the impact that a teacher can have on their students. They obviously teach them a bunch of things and impart all of this knowledge and skill. But also it's a life on life interaction. And so much of what we as teachers get to impart on our students is actually it's character and it's caring for those people and helping them grow. And so I think back to that little moment, Amazing. That little conversation. I didn't even know what I said. I don't know what my answer was, but that interaction changed the way I thought about it.
Isn't that fascinating? We think about an educational moment. We're thinking in the classroom, instruction, learning, but actually outside the classroom and about relationships, ultimately, which is obviously the foundation of great education, those terrific relationships. Eddie, I come from a family of teachers, so I know a lot about the passion and the enthusiasm that goes with teaching and the enormous benefits it brings to you when you participate in that. We have some challenges at the moment with attracting and retaining teachers. Two things. What would your pitch be to somebody to become a teacher? And secondly, what do you think we need to do to solve the challenge of teacher attraction and retention?
It's probably worth saying that obviously, you and I are having this conversation right now, and my pitch would be very different based on the individual person who I was speaking to. If someone came to me and said, I'm contemplating a career in education and I've had the great joy of working with such a diversity of colleagues, and many of them come with very different motivations, and they're different people themselves. They bring different strengths and different journeys to who they are as a teacher in schools, right? However, I will say that across all of those teachers, I actually think of there was a motivational psychologist named Dan Pink, and he talked about these 3 qualities that tend to motivate people and provide the drive for why you would stay in difficult work, especially, this goes to your question. I don't know why sometimes people don't talk about it in frank ways, because it's just a reality. Teaching in Australia, it's not a job that is remunerated really well. It's not a job with high social status. And so there has to be a strong intrinsic motivator apart from that. And so the 3 things that Dan Pink talks about are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. There has to be this sense of I have choice and I have the ability to make decisions to do what's best for my students. And yes, I have a syllabus that was handed down to me, and I don't get the ability to change that document. So yes, I have very clear guidelines and instructions around that. A school is in some ways, an extremely orderly place where I'm regimented by the time of a bell, and there are certain guidelines that I have to follow. Nonetheless, within that, there's an incredible amount of freedom that I have as a teacher, which I've found to be, for anyone who's thinking about coming into education, extremely attractive. Mastery, there's this ability to get better and better at what we do. And I've been teaching for more than 15 years now, and I look with some embarrassment at the way that I used to teach, and I think, wow, what was I thinking? Say, for example, you touched on it before, the importance of relationships. I always kind of intuited that was important, but I didn't know necessarily how to do that well. And so that's an area that I've grown and developed. And then lastly, and probably most important, the moral purpose for the work of a teacher. To grow and cultivate young people so that they can become citizens who can contribute to society in a meaningful way, in whatever way, shape, or form. That's an incredible privilege. That's what drives me and rolls me out of bed every morning. So I think that's my pitch.
Yeah, it's a pretty compelling pitch. I love that. I mean, that metaphor of planting trees that you'll never sit under, that others will. It's a wonderful contribution and legacy. So then the attraction retention challenge. What do you? And there's no one thing, but what sort of things would help with that? Yeah,
it's an extremely complex and wicked problem. So it has to be multifactorial. I think that firstly, there's a lot to be changed in our public perception, right? And the way that a culture views any kind of job, that doesn't just get changed by a campaign or by the way that we, pay is important, but it's not the only thing. Working conditions are important, but it's not the only thing. I think about the conversations that we have around a dinner table, right? That's every single person, I hope, who's listening to our voices right now. That's something which no one tells us how to do that. We make decisions about how we speak to our children and the people in our orbit, in our communities. And being able to hold up that work as important to say that, it really matters that the people who build roads and bridges and hospitals are cared for and valued. The people who build human beings, right? That's incredibly noble work. So I think about that side of things. I do also think about the fact that as a system, I work for the New South Wales Department of Education. It's the biggest education system in the Southern Hemisphere. And so the way that, we are constantly on a journey of trying to improve the way that people go on a journey within education, that they can continue to grow, feel like there are pathways for their skill and their capacities to be developed. I'm part of Gen Y. I'm a millennial, right? And I know that my generation, it often looks at, it has to know that work's not just important, but it's good, right? And that there's a contribution to society. And so holding that up and saying, wow, when I get to work in a school, this is the difference I get to make. I think these are the kinds of things.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Just the recognition of that incredible contribution, and we all have a role in really valuing that and what that looks like. 15 years of teaching, incredible success of Mr. WooTube. Congratulations and thank you. So many students, parents, teachers have benefited from that extraordinary contribution. Over that time, you've learnt a bit about how to engage young people. Interested in your insights into that, about effectively engaging young people for education. And then second to that question, for us at the Smith family, we're keenly interested in engaging young people who experience disadvantage. What additional insights you might have for those types of young people, and particularly thinking about the work you've done in regional and rural New South Wales?
Relationship is everything in the classroom. I remember a young man I used to teach who he was extremely intelligent, but it was very clear he was just disengaged with the learning. I think he was disengaged because he was intelligent and because he was bored and didn't see the value of what we were doing. He found it easy and straightforward.
Yeah.
He just switched off. And there are numerous young men like Kevin who I've met since then, who the education system as a whole isn't geared really well to meet their needs. And I remember I tried everything, Doug. I tried all these different activities. I tried different kinds of, collaborative learning projects and things like that. And I was just beating my head against a brick wall. And then we transitioned into term 2 of the school year, which at our school meant we switched from the summer sports season into the winter sports season.
Yeah.
And suddenly I became Kevin's touch football coach.
Okay.
And I think for that young man, this was his opportunity to see me as something other than his maths teacher. It was also my opportunity to see him as something different from this kid who was just sitting in the back of my classroom, causing me a headache and, making me struggle with how do I engage him. We got to see each other in a totally different way. The dynamic between us changed. And I was able to actually see him as a leader. He was the captain of the team. And I thought, wow, okay, if I can interact with him and engage with him at that level, everything changes, right? So relationship is vital. And then my second answer to that is there are a lot of things that you could classify as techniques or strategies within the classroom. I didn't set out originally to become a mathematics teacher. When I was at school, when I was Kevin's age, I was really good at English, history, drama. I was a humanities kid.
Right.
And so I was on that trajectory.
Okay.
And, it was a very sliding doors moment when that changed. But the upshot of that is, as a mathematics teacher, even though this is not common for people teaching this subject, I'm a storyteller in the classroom. I kind of can't help it. And I feel very grateful for the fact that I somewhat stumbled by accident onto the fact that before there were books, before there were schools, human beings have learned through stories. And so being able to reach my students and in a math lesson, use, a 3-act structure, setup, conflict, resolution, the basic storytelling tools.
Yes.
Any teacher can touch on that, right? Young people have to see the relevance and the relationship of what they're being asked to learn with the world that they inhabit and the life that they live. And for every student, you walk into a classroom of 30 kids, and there's going to be such a variety of different lessons there and ways to connect. I remember teaching a young man who, he was in my year 10 class for the sole reason that the minimum school leaving age was 17. He had no interest in any of this. And I remember talking to Daniel. I said to him, what do you want to do? You don't want to be here. Where would you prefer to be? And he said, I've got some friends who are doing construction apprenticeship. That kind of work, I think I'd be really good at it. And even though I wasn't meant to teach it until several weeks later in my scope and sequence in my teaching program, I thought, you need to learn some trigonometry, Daniel, because actually that is super important in the field that you're going to go toward. And I can give you examples that are extremely concrete and from the world that you care about. And whether it's that or becoming a pastry chef or understanding how to code a video game, there's maths in everything that we care about. And so being able to connect that to young people, that's not easy. I think it's kind of a bit of a truism that the young people who need our care the most will often ask for it in the ways we like the least. And so I'm not trying to say this is an easy thing to do. And sometimes, that conversation I had with Daniel, that took weeks for me to get to the point where he would trust me enough to know that I was actually interested in his well-being and him as a person. And I wasn't trying to socially engineer him or something like that. So that's not easy work, but nonetheless, it's important and worth investing time in.
It's amazing. I mean, you're bringing us into the art and science of teaching, and what I hear in that a bit is finding the strengths in students, looking for the relevance and the power of story. These are higher order skills, aren't they? Often we just think it's teaching, you're imparting knowledge and information, but all that thinking that goes into the craft of teaching is quite extraordinary. Hence, we really do need to value teachers and what they do. Eddie, bringing things to maths, and it's obviously such a foundational capability for your education, for life, for work. It's just so vital. When we look at the students that we work with, the average student based on NAPLAN data by the age of 15 who might experience disadvantage can be 4 to 5 years behind their peers. It's a big gap. Why do you think that gap's there? And you've given some clues to how we might bridge it, but specifically in terms of mathematics, are there particular things you think we need to do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, a lot like many of the other questions you've asked me today, Doug, there's so many facets to this. The first two that come to mind are that, number one, mathematics is this intensely hierarchical subject. There's foundational knowledge, and without that, it's extremely difficult, not impossible, but extremely difficult to progress in a productive way. So I'll give a quick example. In late primary school, we really start to lock down the basic fundamental principles that help students understand and master fractions, decimals, percentages, right? And we see these kinds of ideas all around us in the world, and so they're pretty important to get a hold of, right? Now, when students cross over from year 6 into year 7, they enter high school, there is, number one, a big change in learning style often, and teaching style. So often students will be used to a certain way of teaching and learning, and then suddenly there's a big dramatic change, right? And change is difficult for anyone to manage. Young people are incredibly resilient, but nonetheless, it's these junction points that often some students fall off the horse and they never get back on, right? But in year 7 and 8, we start to then think about, well, okay, fractions, decimals, percentages, they start to form the foundations of topics like algebra, trigonometry. And so if those early building blocks are missing, which can happen in 100 different ways, right? There are gaps in learning. Students move from one school to another. They have a teacher who maybe doesn't feel really comfortable or confident teaching mathematics, and that is often transmitted kind of subconsciously to students. Any one of those reasons could mean that coming into learning these more advanced concepts, the building blocks aren't there. You're building a house of cards, the foundation is weak, and so the whole thing collapses, right? We also have an enormous challenge. I talked about those hundreds of different reasons why gaps can emerge. In high school, we have specialist mathematics teachers, but we don't have enough of them. And so we are really grateful as a profession for what we call out-of-field mathematics teachers. English teachers, PE teachers, primary teachers who don't have a formal qualification or a degree in mathematics, but they step into the breach and help schools teach those students. But of course, I mean, if you asked me to go and teach a subject that I wasn't fully qualified in, I'd do my darndest, but I'm not going to do that as well as someone who has all of that foundational knowledge. So those are some of the contributing factors. And in terms of trying to address that, right? There's no other way to work out and then ameliorate some of those problems without knowing the individual student. It's one of the reasons why the first of the Australian professional standards for teachers is it's not know the content and how to teach it. It's know the students and how they learn, right? So that close knowledge, which, we use big data. We've got all of this assessment and all of these dashboards that feed into our knowledge of different students and the journeys they've gone on. But it's also the small data, right? It's the conversations with those students, with their family, with the teachers who they've had before, to be able to understand what's the journey that this student has taken to get to my classroom. And then we've got to have both systematic and individualized mechanisms to help those students address some of those gaps. Otherwise, we are up the creek without a paddle. I think about here at Cherry Technology High School, we've got, say for example, before and after school, we've got the opportunity for any student to drop in and to be able to say, okay, I'm having trouble with my homework. My teacher in class has explained it this one way and I'm still just struggling to wrap my head around it. Can you give me an alternative? We've got peer tutoring initiatives where a student can say, I I want someone who's a bit closer to me, who really very recently went through this struggle and can help me to, walk through each of these individual steps in my homework, which I'm struggling with for this test that's coming up. So there have to be these kinds of mechanisms, both high level and also for each individual, to help students get back on the train.
Makes perfect sense. Eddie, building on that a little and thinking about something that might be an enabler, that might help this journey, is AI. So interested in your thoughts about the opportunities. Yes, there are risks. That's a whole conversation, but the opportunities for students through AI, and particularly what that means for the workforce, the teacher workforce with AI as well, because that's another big change they've got to manage and work through.
For me, it's, when 12 to 18 months ago, as we're speaking right now, AI has been around for a long time, but it burst onto the scene in this dramatic way. And suddenly we all, I have to wonder what people thought the first time they saw a motorized vehicle heading down. Could you even call it a road back then? It's like, here comes with a horse and carriage. And then what is this? There's this quantum leap that we've made. And suddenly these large language models are able to do things which we kept in the realm of only human beings can do this, right? And suddenly that's not true anymore. Mathematics educators crossed this same boundary decades ago when scientific calculators, which we chuckle about now, they're quite antiquated in our classrooms. But the fundamental question that was raised by that technology and today's technology is the same. What do we really value for our students to learn and for us as teachers to educate in our schools, if this thing that was really difficult before, now we can just outsource to technology? I'm excited because, say in the area of mathematics, it used to be that, well, we want our students to be really good at looking up their book of log tables, operating their slide rule. And now you can just press a few buttons and get a perfectly accurate answer out the other end. And what that's enabled us to do in mathematics is free students up to ask more interesting questions and solve much more challenging problems. The kinds of things we can do now, I can tell a student, all right, work out where this projectile is going to end up if it's sent at this angle, at this amount of force, and they can almost effortlessly work out an answer to that. With the power of AI to be able to consume these vast amounts of information, to be able to come up with different ideas that we as human beings can then consider, can weigh. We can think about the human aspect and the ethics side of things, because technology, for all of the promises that have been made, it's never ever replaced human beings, but it's augmented what we've done. I'm really optimistic about, say for example, I personally am an extremely slow reader. I love reading, and it just takes me forever to think, to digest. And there are so many things out there on my nightstand. There's this tall pile of books that I always look at with a little bit of guilt as I go to the bookstore and get a new book or look up a new research paper or things like that. And in fact, I don't think we're far off from this. If I had an AI body that I could just say, look, here's a body of work that I'm looking into and I'm wanting to understand better. Hundreds and thousands of pages of research and work has been done here. Can you, I'm not asking you to read this for me, because I want to do the thinking. That's I think one of the major dangers that I see students interacting with. They are using the AI to not have to think, and in some ways missing the best parts of learning, because as we do the thinking, we shape who we are, right? But I'm going to use that AI to say, hey, pull out for me some of the insights you've noticed. Can you compare these two things? Send me to a page to do that reading myself, right? So that I can head straight to page 251 and say, okay, this now, I can see how this connects to these other bits of thinking which I've done. I'm not relying on the AI for the answer in the same way that when I ask students to punch their buttons on a calculator, they don't just take that answer at face value. They critique it. They say, does this make sense? Is that reasonable? The calculator is really good at giving an answer to the question that they asked. And if they asked a question that's not helpful or is misaligned in some way, if a prompt that a student's giving to an AI hasn't been the most helpful, then the AI is not going to give a helpful answer, right? So being able to critique that and challenge our thinking, for me, that's tremendously exciting. It's moving fast. I think it's going to take great care, as it always does when technology leaps forward. We need to be critical and thinking about the human aspects of what this technology means, but I'm excited. It's going to open new opportunities for us.
Indeed, and really welcome your optimism, and we're certainly optimistic at the Smith family, and as well as thinking about the opportunities of AI for young people and their learning. We're also committed to focusing on the fundamentals of access, digital access. So we still have a lot of work to do on that as a nation, getting those things more universally in place for all students, so everyone can benefit from that opportunity of AI and not see the gap grow even further in students and their outcomes. Eddie, as I look at the 71,000 students on our Learning for Life program, we work with another 100,000 young people across 800 schools or thereabouts. I just see extraordinary potential. Every young person I meet, there's just incredible inherent potential, but not consistent opportunities for all those young people. I'm sure that you see that, particularly as you do your work in rural and remote communities. Tell us a bit about what you learn from that work with students in those communities, as to how we might get better outcomes for all young people.
Doug, you're right. When I think about, I have the privilege of traveling all over New South Wales, doing work in Lismore, Wagga, Goulburn, Broken Hill. And when I meet these young people, the words of Sir Ken Robinson jump to mind. He said once, "You're a human being. Untapped creative potential just comes in the box," right? And that is something which we can say is universally true, but that lack of opportunity and the inequity that we see across our system is why there isn't universal access to find that potential and then put it to use, right? So I guess for me, I see, number one, there's a huge lesson for educators to be reminded of the capacity and the incredible life-changing power that education can have. And we need to, I think, take the moment to remind ourselves of why actually we can still have hope and we can't give up, right? I've worked with educators who have been confronted by the challenges of inequity across our system and have found it too much. And I want to just respect that. It is heartbreaking sometimes when you see the outcomes of students that aren't coming up to their potential, right? But what I always say to myself as I look at that as a possibility for what I would choose to do is that if I walk away, that makes the problem worse, not better. It means there's less of us contributing to change the situation. Socially, we've got so many opportunities, but if we let those discouraging realities take hold, it's easy to sort of give into that pessimism, I guess. So I guess for me, as I work across the system, as I work in different jurisdictions as well, I think I know this is gonna it may sound trite, I think, but I've just found it to be true. I remember once I was talking to a psychologist and she reminded me of how easy it is to forget how many things we can be grateful for.
Yeah.
And she said, it's embarrassing how effective this is, but do this experiment. For a month, keep a journal and every day write 3 things you're grateful for. And like most people who hear this advice, I just balked at it. I said, really? That just sounds so pedestrian.
Yeah.
How can that really have an impact? And I think there's a version of that for us in education to be able to say, wow, there are actually dozens, hundreds, thousands of these stories that we encounter all the time. And if I can remind myself, actually, that's part of that moral purpose I was talking about before, that reminds me to keep going and not lose hope for all the people I am getting to change their future for. And knowing those stories changes everything.
Yeah. And Eddie, so you've spoken there about hope. And I'm wondering if there's a particular experience that you can link to clearly your optimism and your sense of hope for the future.
Look, I'm going to do something that's actually really bad to do on a podcast because most people can't see you and I at the moment. There's some people can if you're watching along. I brought something with me. Many teachers have something like what I'm about to share with you. They have a shoebox or a folder, and what they do is they keep mementos of students who they've taught in the past, those stories that I just sort of referenced that encourage and remind them of the hope that they have and why they do what they do. And I'm not gonna read this whole card to you because some of it is particular. It's part of the story of this particular individual, and I'm not gonna share their name with you. But the context for this is that this is a student who had a really difficult time in years 11 and 12 when I got to teach her, and she gave me this card after graduating, just as she on her graduation day. Wow. In fact, she said, "The guidance you've given me has completely changed my outlook on the world and my life. This time last year, I thought that I wouldn't be alive to graduate, but your support motivated and moved me so much that I stayed, and now I get to walk across that stage." And she's talking about the stage in the hall where she graduated. And for me, I mean, you can tell it right now, right? I have the privilege of working across a big system and affecting thousands of schools and teachers and students. But I don't think there is anything bigger than getting to have an impact like that on a single person. That is something that will stay with me forever. And I know that every educator, every teacher listening has a story like that. They may not know it.
Yes.
I am 100% confident that I have taught many other students who just didn't write a card or I never found out about it. And to just have that confidence that we make that difference, I think is enormously hope-giving and encouraging.
Yeah, what a wonderful way to end our conversation. And what I'm thinking about as you tell that story, Eddie, is obviously, as you say, the impact for that young person, but then the impact for their family over time. So there's almost these generational impacts that you can have by having making such a profound difference for a young person at a really formative stage of their life. So look, really appreciate you sharing that story. It's a wonderful way to round out this really inspiring conversation.
Doug, my pleasure. Thank you.
And if you'd like to hear more of these types of great conversations, jump onto the smithfamily.com.au, and you can also read more about our work as well. Thanks very much.